The diner's neon sign flickered, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked pavement outside. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and nostalgia, the kind that clings to checkered floors and vinyl booths like a ghost. At the counter, an old man sat alone, his gnarled hands trembling as he traced the edge of a laminated menu, his eyes carrying a weight no one in the room could name. Ella, the waitress, barely noticed him at first. The night shift at Rosie's diner was a blur of truckers, drunks, and the occasional lost soul, all demanding coffee or greasy eggs before vanishing into the dark. But this man, his quiet was different, heavy, like the pause before a storm. He wore a threadbare coat, its gray fabric frayed at the cuffs, and his silver hair fell in wisps over a face etched with lines deeper than time alone could carve. "Just the toast," he said softly, his voice rough but kind, pointing to the cheapest item on the menu, a single slice for $1.29. Ella nodded, scribbling the order, her mind already drifting to the tips she wouldn't make tonight. The diner was nearly empty, save for a couple in the corner whispering over cold fries and a jukebox humming a forgotten Hank Williams tune. Ella slid the order to the cook, then leaned against the counter, stealing a glance at the old man. His hands, spotted with age, folded neatly in front of him, but his eyes, pale blue and sharp, seemed to be searching for something beyond the diner's walls. She'd seen her share of loners, but this one felt like he was carrying a story too big for the room. "Toasts up," the cook grunted, sliding a plate across the pass. Ella set it in front of the man, noticing how he hesitated, as if the act of eating required some unspoken permission. "You want butter or jam with that?" she asked, more out of habit than care. He shook his head, offering a faint smile. "Just this is fine. Don't need much." His voice had a lilt, something old-fashioned, like he'd stepped out of a black-and-white photograph. She turned to refill the coffee pot, but his next words stopped her cold. "You ever think about the things people leave behind?" he asked, not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the toast as if it held secrets. Ella froze, the pot heavy in her hand. There was something in his tone, grief, maybe, or regret, that made her chest tighten. She set the pot down and leaned closer, curiosity tugging at her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice softer now, like she was afraid of breaking whatever fragile thing hung in the air. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, its edges curled and yellowed. He slid it across the counter toward her, his fingers trembling. "This," he said simply. Ella picked it up, her breath catching as she saw the image. A young woman, maybe 20, with bright eyes and a smile that could have lit the whole diner. She stood in front of a Ferris wheel, her dress swaying in what must have been a summer breeze. "She was my daughter," the old man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Her name was Lily." Ella's heart sank. The word was carried a finality that made her want to look away, but she couldn't. "She's beautiful," she said, because it was true, and because she didn't know what else to say. The old man nodded, his eyes glistening. "She loved places like this," he said, glancing around the diner. Diners, jukeboxes, the hum of people just living. Said they made her feel like the world was still good. Ella swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her. She'd worked at Rosie's for 3 years, scraping by on tips and late-night shifts, and she'd stopped seeing the diner as anything more than a paycheck. But now, looking at this man and his photograph, she felt something shift, like the diner was more than just a stopover for weary travelers. "What happened to her?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. The old man's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "She got sick," he said. "Real sick, when she was 23. Doctors did what they could, but," he trailed off, his voice breaking. Ella felt a lump in her throat, her hands fidgeting with a napkin to keep from reaching out to him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the photograph, as if he could will Lily back into the world just by looking at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The jukebox clicked, switching to a new song, and the couple in the corner laughed, oblivious to the quiet tragedy unfolding at the counter. Ella wanted to say something, anything, to ease the man's pain, but words felt useless. Then, as if sensing her struggle, he looked up at her, his blue eyes piercing. "You remind me of her, you know," he said. "Not in looks, but the way you move. Like you're carrying something heavy, but you keep going." Ella blinked, caught off guard. She didn't know what to say. Her life wasn't exactly a fairy tale dead-end job, a tiny apartment she could barely afford, and dreams she'd long since buried, but she didn't think it showed. Not like that. Before she could respond, the diner's door swung open, and a new customer shuffled in, breaking the moment. It was a woman, middle-aged, with a sharp jawline and eyes that darted around the room like she was searching for something or someone. The old man glanced at the newcomer, and for a split second, his expression changed fear, maybe, or recognition. Ella noticed, but before she could ask, he slid the photograph back into his pocket and took a bite of his toast, as if closing the door on their conversation. "You got other customers," he said, his voice steady again. "Don't let me keep you." Ella hesitated, torn between the new customer and the story she felt was only half told. The woman who'd just walked and sat at a booth near the window, her hands fidgeting with a silver bracelet that glinted under the diner's lights. There was something about her, something that made Ella's skin prickle, like the air had shifted in a way she couldn't explain. As Ella moved to grab a menu for the new customer, she couldn't shake the feeling that the old man's story wasn't just about loss. There was something more, something hidden in the way he'd looked at that woman, in the photograph he'd tucked away like a secret. She glanced back at him, watching as he ate his toast in silence, and wondered what else he wasn't saying. Ella handed the new customer a menu, her mind still tethered to the old man at the counter. The woman in the booth barely looked up, her fingers tracing the silver bracelet as if it were a lifeline. "Just coffee," she said, her voice clipped, like she was in a hurry to be anywhere but here. Ella nodded, but as she turned back toward the coffee pot, she caught the old man stealing another glance at the woman, his jaw tightening in a way that made her pause. The diner's hum felt heavier now, the jukebox's soft croon unable to mask the tension threading through the air. Ella poured the coffee, her hands moving on autopilot, but her thoughts were racing. Who was this woman, and why did the old man seem so unsettled by her presence? She set the coffee in front of the woman, noticing the faint tremor in her hands, the way her eyes flicked toward the counter, then away, as if she, too, was aware of him. Back at the counter, the old man had finished his toast, the plate now a scattering of crumbs. He was staring into his empty coffee mug, his fingers drumming a slow, uneven rhythm. Ella approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "You want a refill?" she asked, her tone gentle, probing. He looked up, his blue eyes clouded with something she couldn't read: guilt, maybe, or fear. "No, thank you," he said, then hesitated. "That woman, does she come here often?" Ella glanced over her shoulder at the woman in the booth, who was now staring out the window, her coffee untouched. "First time I've seen her," Ella said, keeping her voice low. "You know her?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, driven by the same curiosity that had pulled her into his story about Lily. The old man's face hardened, and for a moment, Ella thought he wouldn't answer. Then he leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "She looks like someone I used to know," he said. "Someone I failed." The word hung between them, sharp and heavy, like a blade dropped on the counter. Ella's breath caught, but before she could press further, the woman in the booth stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She tossed a crumpled bill onto the table and headed for the door, her bracelet glinting as she passed under the neon sign. Ella watched her go, a strange unease settling in her chest. The old man's eyes followed the woman too, and when the door swung shut, he let out a breath, like he'd been holding it for years. "You ever make a mistake you can't undo?" he asked suddenly, his voice raw. Ella turned back to him, her heart pounding. She wanted to say no, to keep the conversation light, but something in his gaze stopped her. "Yeah," she admitted, thinking of her own regrets, chances not taken, words left unsaid. "More than I'd like." He nodded, as if her answer was enough. Then he reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed and worn. He opened it to a page filled with tight, careful handwriting and slid it toward her. "Read this," he said. "Not now. Later. When you're alone." Ella's fingers brushed the notebook's cover, its leather cool and soft, like it had been handled 1,000 times. She didn't know why, but she felt like she was holding something sacred. Before she could ask what it was, the diner's door opened again, and a young man stepped inside, his hoodie pulled low over his face. He didn't sit, didn't order, just stood near the entrance, his eyes scanning the room. Ella's stomach twisted. Something about him felt off, like he was looking for trouble. The old man noticed too, his posture stiffening. "You should put that away," he said quietly, nodding at the notebook. Ella slipped it into her apron pocket, her pulse quickening. The young man finally moved, sliding into a booth near the back, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Ella approached cautiously, her instincts screaming to keep her distance. "Can I get you something?" she asked, forcing a smile. He looked up, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Just water," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. As she turned to fetch it, she caught the old man watching the newcomer, his expression unreadable but intense, like he was piecing together a puzzle. Back at the counter, Ella leaned close to the old man. "What's in the notebook?" she whispered, unable to hold back. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the young man in the booth. "Answers," he said finally, "and maybe a warning." His words sent a chill down her spine, and she suddenly felt like the diner wasn't just a backdrop Anna Maria, it was a stage, and something bigger was unfolding. The jukebox clicked, switching to a mournful tune, and Ella's eyes darted between the old man, the notebook in her pocket, and the young man in the booth. She didn't know how, but she was certain they were connected, tangled in a story she was only beginning to understand. The old man pushed his empty mug toward her, then stood, his movements slow but deliberate. "Keep that notebook safe," he said, his voice firm. "And don't trust everyone who walks through that door." As he shuffled toward the exit, Ella's mind raced. She wanted to call after him, to demand answers, but the weight of the notebook in her pocket kept her silent. The young man in the booth was watching her now, his gaze sharp and unsettling. She forced herself to move, to act normal, but the air felt thick with secrets, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the old man's story was far from over. Ella's fingers brushed the notebook in her apron pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the old man's cryptic words. The diner felt smaller now, the air thick with unspoken questions. The young man in the hoodie sat in the back booth, his water untouched, his eyes flicking between the counter and the door like he was waiting for something or someone. She busied herself wiping down the counter, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the old man's story about Lily, his daughter, and the woman with the silver bracelet who'd left in a hurry. The notebook felt like a ticking bomb, and Ella's curiosity burned hotter with every passing second. Who was the old man, really? And what did he mean by answers? And Jimmy, the cook, called out from the kitchen, "Ella, you got a regular up front." She glanced at the young man again, his presence still unsettling her, and headed to take another order, trying to shake the feeling that the night was spiraling into something she couldn't control. The new customer was a trucker, grizzled and tired, who ordered a burger and coffee without looking up from his phone. Ella scribbled the order, her thoughts still on the notebook. She couldn't read it now, not with the young man watching her like a hawk, but the urge to open it was overwhelming. She slipped into the back, pretending to check on Jimmy, and stole a glance at the first page. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and the first line made her heart stop. "If you're reading this, you're already part of it." She snapped the notebook shut, her pulse racing. Part of what? She wanted to keep reading, but the young man's presence in the diner felt like a warning, echoing the old man's words. Don't trust everyone who walks through that door. She stepped back out front, forcing a smile as she served the trucker his coffee, but her eyes kept darting to the young man. He hadn't moved, his posture rigid, his hands still in his pockets. Something about him screamed danger, but she couldn't place why. As the night dragged on, the diner emptied out, leaving just Ella, Jimmy in the kitchen, and the young man in the booth. She approached him again, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "You sure you don't want anything else?" she asked. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You talked to the old man," he said, not a question but a statement. Ella's blood ran cold. "Just took his order," she said, keeping her tone light. "Toast. Cheap guy." She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. He leaned forward, his voice low. "He give you anything? A book, maybe?" Ella's heart pounded, but she shook her head, her hand instinctively brushing the notebook in her pocket. "Nope, just a photograph." Said it was his daughter. The lie came easily, but she wasn't sure if he bought it. He leaned back, his expression unreadable, then stood and tossed a few bills on the table. "Tell him Marcus says hello," he said, then walked out, the door's bell jangling behind him. Ella stood frozen, her mind racing. Marcus, The name felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place, though she didn't know why. She locked the door behind him, her hands trembling, and pulled the notebook out again. This time, she read further, her breath catching as the words unfolded. Lily didn't just get sick. She found something she wasn't supposed to, and they made her pay for it. The words hit like a punch. Ella's knees felt weak, and she sank onto a stool, the notebook trembling in her hands. Who were they? And what did this have to do with her? The old man's warning, the woman with the bracelet, Marcuse, it was all connected, but the shape of it was still blurry, like a photograph out of focus. She flipped through the pages, finding dates, names, and cryptic notes. Project Elysium. Classified. Lily found the ledger. They knew. The handwriting grew shakier, as if written in a hurry, and one line stood out. Ella, if you're reading this, you're in danger. Her breath stopped. Her name. In his notebook. How did he know her? She hadn't told him her name, had she? Her mind spun, replaying every moment of their conversation, searching for clues. The photograph of Lily, the way he'd said Ella reminded him of her. It wasn't just sentiment. It was a message. But what? The jukebox clicked, switching to a new song, and the sudden sound made her jump. She shoved the notebook back into her pocket, her heart pounding. She needed answers, but the diner felt too exposed now, its familiar warmth replaced by a creeping dread. She thought of the woman with the bracelet. Had she been part of this too? And Marcus, who'd known about the notebook without her saying a word. Ella's shift ended at 3 a.m., and she stepped into the cool night air, the notebook heavy in her pocket. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Marcus lurking in the shadows. The street was empty, but the weight of the old man's story and the notebook's secrets followed her home. Ella's apartment was a cramped studio, the kind where the hum of the fridge doubled as white noise. She locked the door behind her, double-checking the bolt, and pulled the notebook from her pocket. Under the dim glow of a single lamp, she opened it again, her heart racing as she read the words that had shaken her to her core. Ella, if you're reading this, you're in danger. The notebook was a maze of fragmented thought states, locations, coded phrases like Elysium and the ledger. One page listed names, some crossed out, others circled, including Marcus and Clara, the woman with the bracelet. Ella's hands shook as she pieced together the old man's story. Lily, his daughter, hadn't just died of illness. She'd uncovered something dangerous enough to cost her life. And now, somehow, Ella was tangled in it. She flipped to a page titled The Truth, the handwriting frantic. They run everything. The diner's a front. Rosie's not who she seems. Ella's stomach dropped. Rosie, her boss, who'd hired her 3 years ago with a warm smile and a promise of flexible hours. It didn't make sense, but the notebook's urgency was undeniable. Another line caught her eye. Lily left a key. Find it. Trust no one. A key? To what? Ella's phone buzzed, and she jumped, her nerves frayed. It was a text from an unknown number. You have it. Bring it to the pier at dawn. Come alone. Her blood ran cold. Marcus. It had to be. She clutched the notebook tighter, her mind racing. She hadn't told anyone about it, yet he knew. How? She paced the room, the notebook's weight pulling her deeper into its mystery. She thought of the old man's eyes, the way they'd held both grief and warning. He'd chosen her, but why? She reread the line about her resembling Lily not in looks, but in spirit. Was that why he'd trusted her with this? Or was she just a pawn in a game she didn't understand? A knock at the door made her freeze. It was 4 a.m. No one should be here. She crept to the peephole, her heart pounding. It was Rosie, her face pale under the hallway's fluorescent light. Ella, you okay? She called, her voice soft but urgent. You left the diner in a hurry. Ella's hand tightened on the doorknob. Rosie had never come to her apartment before. The notebook's warning echoed. Rosie's not who she seems. I'm fine, Ella called back, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. Just tired. I'll see you tomorrow. Rosie lingered, then nodded and left, her footsteps fading down the hall. Ella sank against the door, her breath shallow. She didn't know who to trust anymore, not Rosie, not Marcus, maybe not even herself. She opened the notebook again, desperate for answers. A loose page slipped out, a folded note with a single line. The key is in the jukebox. Ella's heart skipped. The jukebox at Rosie's diner, where Lily loved to linger, where the old man had sat. It wasn't just a relicit, it was a hiding place. But for what? And how could she get to it without being seen? Dawn was hours away, and the pier loomed in her mind like a trap. She couldn't gon it without knowing more. She read further, finding a sketch of a symbolous circle with 3 lines cutting through it, labeled Elysium's mark. It felt familiar, but she couldn't place it. Another note mentioned a ledger, something Lily had found, something that had made her a target. Ella's mind spun with questions. Was the ledger in the diner? Was the key to it? And why was her name in this notebook? She thought of the woman with the bracelet, Clara, maybe in her hurried exit. Had she been running from Marcus? Or was she part of whatever they were? Ella's thoughts circled back to the old man, his quiet strength, his warning. He'd given her the notebook for a reason, but he hadn't told her everything. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he was protecting Hira using her. Ella tucked the notebook under her mattress, her mind made up. She'd go back to the diner before dawn, before the meeting at the pier. She needed to find the key, to understand what Lily had died for. The thought of walking into Rosie's, knowing it might be a front, made her skin crawl, but she had no choice. The old man's story, Lily's death, the notebook, it was all leading her somewhere, and she couldn't turn back now. As she grabbed her jacket, the symbol from the notebook flashed in her mind. She froze, realizing where she'd seen it before, etched faintly on the side of the jukebox, hidden in plain sight. Her heart raced. The diner wasn't just a stage, it was the heart of the mystery, and Ella was walking straight into it.